Hello students, our today's topic is growth and development. So first of all, you should know what is growth. The growth refers to quantitative. Growth is quantitative. Increase in size, mass or the volume. According to Todd, growth is increase in size. According to Profit, growth is increase in the size and the number. What is development? Development is a progress toward the maturity. Now, what is difference between growth and development? Growth, it is a quantitative increase in cell size, mass or volume, whereas the development, it refers to the qualitative abilities or progression in skills or abilities. In the context of living organism, growth refers to increase in the physical size or the mass, as in case of a plant that is growing taller or a child that is gaining a weight. On other hand, development refers to maturation of physical, mental or emotional capacity, such as child that is learning to walk or person developing the social skills. Next are the growth spurts. So growth spurts, they are the period of the rapid growth in height and weight. So following are the timings of the growth spurt. Just before the birth, the first growth spurt is seen just before the birth and 1 year after the birth. Other is seen in the mixed dentition growth spurt, that is seen in boys at the age of 8 to 11 years and girls at the age of 9 years. The prepubertal growth spurt, it is seen in boys at age of 14 to 16 years and girls at the 11 to 13 years. So remember, the first growth spurt typically occur during the infancy and early childhood, with the most rapid growth occurring in the first year of the decade. The maximum growth occur in the first year of life. So there is the babies, they can grow at average of 10 inches and triple their birth weight. After the first year, the growth, it tends to slow down. So these growth spurt will be dependent on the various factors like the nutrition, overall health and genetics. Some children may experience earlier or some may experience the late growth spurt. Other important growth curve that you should remember for your exam is what is Squamon growth curve. It is a graphical representation of the stages of growth and development in the humans. So the Squamon growth curve, it provides a framework for understanding the stages of growth and development in the humans. According to Squamon, he noticed the growth in the number one is the lymphoid tissue. The lymphoid tissue, they include the lymph nodes, spleen, thymus, tonsils and other lymphoid organs. So the lymphoid organs, they reaches a growth spurt of around 200% of their adult size by the age of 18 years. And a neural tissue, they reaches to their full size and shape by 6 to 7 years. So remember, during childhood and adolescent, the lymphoid tissue, they grow rapidly, so reaching a peak around the 18 years. So what happens after 18 years? After this age, the lymphoid tissue, it begins to decrease in size and activity. So although it remains important for maintaining the immune function throughout the adulthood. The neural tissue that will include the spinal cord, brain, and they are responsible for controlling all the bodily functions and the activity. So neural tissue, it grows rapidly during the first few years of life, reaching the full size at 6 to 7 years. That is what you have to remember for your exam. It reaches its full size and shape by age of 6 to 7 years. So after this age, the neural tissue, it continue to develop and mature. So overall, the size of shape of brain and nervous system, it doesn't changes significantly. Other are the genital tissue. The genital tissue, it grows at a slower pace during first 10 years. However, after the pubertal growth spurt, the genital tissue growth accelerates rapidly and it reaches maximum growth by age of 16 to 18 years. The last are the general tissue. The general tissue, they grow at a slower pace during the first few years of life and reaching about 50% of adult size by age of 2 to 3 years. So the general tissue, they includes the tissue system that gives shape and support to body, including bone, muscles, cartilage, connective tissue, etc. So it is the Scamone curve of the growth. Other important thing is cephalocaudal growth pattern. What is that? According to the cephalocaudal growth pattern, the growth and development occurs in most organisms, in which growth and development it occurs in head to the tail direction. So the growth, it will begin at the head part and gradually progress downward toward the feet. So during the prenatal, what you will see, the growth pattern is particularly evident. The head and the brain, it develops at much faster rate than the rest of the body. So that results in large head to the body, large head to the body ratio of the infant. After the birth, the cephalocaudal growth pattern continue while the neck and the upper body develop before the lower body and the legs. So that is why the infant, it can lift their head and sit up before they can crawl or walk. So the cephalocaudal growth, it is influenced by various factors like the hormones, nutrition, physical activity. So understanding the cephalocaudal growth pattern, it is important for the diagnosis and management of various disorders like the developmental delays and abnormalities. So remember, the head, it will take around, the head, it take 50% of the total length around third month of intrauterine life. So at the birth, the cranium, the skull is proportionally larger than the face. The skull, it is larger than the face. But the postnatally, the face grow more than the cranium. Remember, at the birth, the face is one eighth the bulk of head, whereas in adult the head forms 1/3 of the bulk. Now let us discuss what are the methods to study growth. The first are the longitudinal studies, other are cross sectional studies, and the third are the semi longitudinal studies. The semi-longitudinal studies, they are also known as hybrid longitudinal studies, as they are combination of the these are the combination of the cross-sectional and the longitudinal study. So number one are the longitudinal study. Longitudinal, the word itself means long. Long means following a group of people over a long period of time. Maybe when they are born until they are adults. So scientists, they can learn a lot from this study, but it is very difficult to keep people in study for so long. The second are the cross-sectional studies. That means looking at different group who are at different age at the same time. So scientists, they can learn a lot from this study, but they cannot see how individual they change over time. The third, they are the semi-longitudinal studies. They are the mix of first two. Now let us study the various methods to study the growth pattern. The first are the biometric. The biometric tests, they are measurement and evaluation of physical and biological characters like the height, weight, and bone density. These are done to determine the growth and development of the organism. Other method is use of implant. So what you do is you implant a small device like wire or marker into the bone or tissue at a particular location. So the growth of the surrounding bone or tissue, they can be measured over time by taking X-ray or other imaging studies. So the implants, they can be placed in the maxilla to study the growth in the specific area. The areas where we place implant, they are the hard palate behind the deciduous canine. So this area is studied prior to the eruption of the maxillary incisors, permanent maxillary incisors. Other is the below anterior nasal spine. This area is studied after the eruption of the maxillary incisors. The implant, it is placed below the anterior nasal spine, that is a bony projection in the midline of maxilla above the incisors. Other implant locations, two implants, they are placed at the zygomatic process of maxilla. Other is the implant, they can be placed at the border between the hard palate and alveolar process median to the first molar. In case of the mandible, The implant it is placed anterior aspect of symphysis in midline below the root tip. 2 pins on the right side of mandibular body, one under the first premolar and other below the second premolar of the first or the first molar. 1 pin on the external aspect of right ramus at the level of the occlusal surface of the molar. So these implant, their location they are chosen because of the precise measurement of the mandibular growth in the different regions. Other method we can use is the vital staining. So vital staining, it is a technique that is used in growth studies to label or mark the specific tissue in order to track their development over the time. So here we use is injection of the dye or tracer into the tissue. So as the tissue they will grow, the dye it will be incorporated in the new cells. So that allows the researcher to follow the path of development of the labeled tissue. So the vital staining it can be used to study the bone growth by injecting a dye into the bone tissue. So as the bone grows, the dye is taken up by new cells and it can be traced over time to measure the rate and pattern of the growth. Now what are the dye that we can use for the vital staining? The first is the tetracycline dye. So this tetracycline dye it will bind to the mineralized tissue and can be visualized under the UV light. Other dye is calcine. It can be visualized under the fluorescent microscopy. Other dye that we can use is the alizarin stain, alizarin red, xylenol orange that we can use. You should know the normal feature of the growth. One term is the growth normality and other feature is variability. So normality, that means the normal feature of growth, they are the pattern of growth that occurs in the healthy individual that include the changes in height, weight and other physical character over time. So it is normal for the infant to double their weight by 6 months of age and triple their weight by 1 year of age. Variability fact that growth may that individual may growth at different rate or they may follow a slight different pattern of growth than expected pattern. The factors that influence such conditions are the genetic, nutrition, physical activity, etc. Other important thing that you should know is what do you mean by differential growth? The differential growth it refers to process by which different part or the tissue of organism they grow at different rate or time. Like during the early stage of human development, we read that the head and brain they grow at much faster rate than rest of body. So that results in large head to body ratio. Similarly, during adolescence there is a growth spurt in which limbs and other part grow rapidly, while the torso it grows more slowly, so that results in changes in the body proportion. So this differential growth it is controlled by many factors like genetics, environment, hormones, nutrition, physical activity. So the differential growth it is important aspect of development and have a significant effect on the form and the. Let us discuss the various growth theories. Before that, you should know what is difference between growth center and growth site. So what is the difference between the growth center and a growth site? A growth center it is a specific area within a bone that is responsible for the growth, whereas growth site it refers to any area of the bone that has potential for the growth. So it is the growth center it is the specific area within the bone that is responsible for the growth, whereas the growth site it refers to the any area of the bone that has potential for the growth. So the specific area of the bone that is responsible for the growth of that bone is known as the growth center. So remember, the growth center these are made up of cartilage cells that will divide and replace the old cells. So as the cells they will divide, they will push the end of bone away from the center, that causes bone to grow longer. Whereas the growth site it is a broader term that we use to distinguish any area of the bone that has potential for the growth, regardless of whether it contains growth center or not. It includes the area where the bone they grow in response to the functional demand, like the muscle attachment or the weight bearing forces. Now let us discuss the various theory of the growth. So what are the growth theories? Various growth theories, they are the genetic theory, sutural theory, cartilaginous theory, functional matrix theory, cybernetic theory, and the composite theory. The first is the genetic theory. So the genetic theory, remember, it proposed that the individual growth it is determined by their genetic makeup. So this genetic makeup will determine the growth of the individual. So according to this theory, the genes they will control the rate, timing, and extent of growth during the individual development. So who gave the genetic theory? It was Sicher. So the genetic theory it was given by Sicher. So what are the limitation of this theory? So the major limitation of this theory is that it does not account for the environmental factors. Yes, it does not account for the environmental factors like the nutrition, physical activity, and the hormonal influences. Also, it does not explain the complex interaction between the growth factors and the signaling pathway that are involved in regulation of the bone and the cartilage growth. The next is the sutural theory. Who gave the sutural theory? It was given by Sicher. So according to this theory, the sutures that exist between the bone of the skull, they play a role in the growth and development of the skull. According to Sicher, he said that sutures, they are the active growth sites that responds to the mechanical and the functional forces like the mastication and tooth eruption by promoting the growth of the bone in specific direction. So Sicher, he believed that the suture, they act as a growth center. So the Sicher said the sutures, they act as a growth center for the skull bones and they have ability to stimulate bone growth in response to the environmental stimuli. So suture, they are not the passive boundary between the bones, but they are the active site of the bone formation. So these theory, the sutural theory, it can explain the craniofacial abnormalities that are caused due to the premature closure or the fusion of the sutures like the craniosynostosis. It does not account for the genetic factor. However, this theory, it has not been supported by some studies that have found the limited growth potential in the sutures. So the other factors or the other mechanisms, they are more important in craniofacial growth. The next is the cartilaginous theory. The cartilaginous theory, it was given by James Scott. So according to the Scott, the growth of the cranial base, it is attributed to the spheno-occipital synchondrosis cartilage. Now this spheno-occipital synchondrosis, it is located at the junction of the sphenoid bone and the occipital bone in the skull. So this region is the spheno-occipital joint. So the growth of the cranial base, it is largely attributed to the spheno-occipital synchondrosis. The nasal septal cartilage that is located in the middle of nose, it plays a role in growth and development of the maxilla, that is a bone that forms the upper jaw and part of the palate. The third, the condylar cartilage, it is responsible for the growth of the condylar cartilage, it is responsible for the growth of the mandible that forms the lower jaw. So these cartilage, they are important for the growth and development of the skull and the facial bone. The next is the functional matrix theory. So who gave the functional matrix theory? It was given by Melvin Moss. So according to the functional matrix theory, it says that the cranial base and the skeleton and the facial skeleton, they act as a functional matrix that guides the development of brain and other organ. So these matrix, they are influenced by genetic and the environmental factor. So according to this theory, the cranial base will provide a stable platform for developing brain, and the facial skeleton, it will serve as scaffold for developing sensory and the motor system. The growth and the remodeling of these matrices, they are driven by functional demands like the mastication, breathing, and the genetic factor. So according to the functional matrix theory, the craniofacial skeleton, they can be thought as functional matrix, that is defined as group of tissue that are functionally integrated and they interact to produce a specific growth pattern. So this growth pattern will be influenced by both genetic and the environmental factors. So the functional matrix theory, it is made up of several components, including the periosteal, including the periosteum sutures and the joint capsule that together form the periosteal capsular skeleton unit. So it has a functional matrix and the skeleton unit. The functional matrix includes the periosteal matrix and the capsular matrix. So the periosteal matrix, it is a component of the functional matrix theory that proposes that the craniofacial skeleton, it is composed of complex system of tissue that will interact to produce a specific growth pattern. Matrix will contain variety of the cells like the osteoblast, osteocytes and osteoclast that work together to build and reshape the bone tissue. The capsular matrix is subdivided into neurocranial capsule and the orofacial capsule. The capsular matrix, it refers to the joint capsule of the craniofacial skeleton that are the connective tissue envelope that surrounds the joints and help to maintain their stability and mobility. So it is composed of neurocranial capsule that is used to describe the bone of the skull that will protect the brain. So this capsule, it is part of the functional matrix of the cranial base that will form a stable platform for the developing brain. The orofacial capsule, it refers to the functional matrix of the facial skeleton that includes the bone of the face and their associated soft tissues like the muscles, ligaments and the nerves. The skeletal unit, it consists of the microskeleton unit and the macroskeleton unit. The microskeleton unit refer to smaller scales like the cellular or molecular level, while the macroskeleton unit refer to the large scale. Now the Morse, in his article, he revived the functional hypothesis. He included three things. One was the He included three things. One was mechanotransduction. Second is epigenetic. Epigenetic epithesis. And third is the connective cellular network. So what do you understand by the term mechanotransduction? So the mechanotransduction that will refer to the way in which the mechanical forces such as those generated during the chewing or breathing are sensed and they are converted into biological signals by the cells in the craniofacial skeleton. So these signals will then regulate the bone growth and remodeling, allowing the skeletal to adapt to the functional demand placed upon them. The second is the epigenetic epithesis. So what do you understand by this term? So this concept proposes that the way in which the craniofacial skeleton develops is influenced by the functional demands that is placed upon it during the growth. So these demands can can affect the gene expression, leading leading to the development of specialized tissue like the periodontal ligament or the TMJ. The third are the connective cellular network. So this referred to the idea that the various tissue in the craniofacial skeleton, they are connected by a network of cells and extracellular matrix. So so this network allow for coordinated growth and remodeling, and that is responsible for changes in the functional demand. So very important for your exam point of view, that Morse revised three things in the functional matrix. Hypothesis. The other is the von Limburg theory. So according to the von Limburg, there are five factors that he believed that control the growth. The number one is the intrinsic factor, local epigenetic factor, general epigenetic factor, local environment, and general environment factors. So first are the intrinsic factors. The intrinsic genetic factors, these are related to the genetic control of the skeleton unit, including the genes that would influence the size, shape, and growth potential of the facial bone. Second are the extrinsic second are the epigenetic factor that could be either local or the general. The local epigenetic factor, the bone growth, it is determined by the genetic control that originating from the structures like the brain, eyes, etc. that include the local factors. The general epigenetic factors are the factors that determine the growth from the distant structures. Example is the hormones, growth hormones, sex hormones, etc. The general environmental factors, the environmental factors could be either local or general. The local factors are the non-genetic factors from the local external environment like the habits or the muscle force, whereas the general environmental factors, they are the general non-genetic influences like the nutrition, oxygen, availability of oxygen in the blood. These are the general environmental factors. Function of the organism.